The words tore through the chamber like shattered glass. Caroline Levitt leaned forward, her voice sharp, dismissive. Dripping with disdain, "Go back to India." For a heartbeat, time froze. The air seemed to thicken. Every eye in the room widened. And the gasps that followed were not just from shock, they were from disbelief that, in the year we stand in, such a venomous phrase could be launched with such casual arrogance. Levitt sat back with a smirk, her shoulders squared in self-satisfaction. To her, it was just another dagger thrown for the cameras, another attempt to belittle, to strip dignity from someone who had earned his place 100 times over. In her sneer was the confidence of someone convinced that cruelty would silence her opponent. She looked around as though expecting approval, as though reveling in the audacity of what she'd just unleashed. But then the camera caught Kash Patel. His face was not twisted with anger. There was no flinch, no sign of defeat. Instead, he was motionless, calm, collected, unreadable. His silence was not weakness. It was power gathering. In that stillness, the chamber felt a subtle shift. The insult hung in the air like smoke, toxic and suffocating. But Patel's steady gaze cut through it like a beam of light. Those watching leaned forward. Commentators would later describe it as the moment you could hear the collective heartbeat of the nation, every immigrant family, every American who had been told they didn't belong, every child who had once been mocked for their name or their accent. They all felt the sting of that insult. And in Patel's silence, they found their anticipation swelling. Caroline thought she had landed the final blow. She thought she had cornered him. But what she failed to see, what the audience was beginning to sense, was that the real storm was not hers to command. Patel's restraint was not surrender. It was the steady inhale before the roar, the quiet before the thunderclap. And then came the unspoken question, alive in every viewer's mind. How would he answer? The chamber trembled with suspense, because what he said next left not just the room, the entire nation stunned. This was not just an insult hurled at a man across a table. It was a phrase loaded with centuries of prejudice, an echo of every slur that has ever been used to draw invisible lines between who is seen as belonging and who is not. Go back has been whispered on playgrounds, shouted at workers, hurled from passing cars, and weaponized in politics to cut deep into the hearts of millions of immigrants who built their lives in America. It is the oldest trick of exclusion, a cruel reminder that no matter what you give, some will still claim you are not enough. And so, in that chamber, the insult landed like a stone thrown into a vast lake, its ripples spreading far beyond the immediate moment. This was bigger than Caroline Levitt versus Kash Patel. It was America confronting itself, staring into a mirror it too often tries to avoid. The question was not just whether Patel would respond, but whether his response could rewrite the meaning of the moment. For immigrants watching from their living rooms. The sting was personal. They remembered the first time someone questioned their right to be here. They remembered parents coming home tired but proud, only to have their accents mocked. They remembered children shrinking under the weight of jokes that weren't really jokes at all. The chamber became a stage, but the audience was the entire nation. Millions leaned forward, wondering, would Patel stand tall for all of them? Or would the venom find its mark? The stakes were immense. If Patel cracked, if he let anger spill, if he allowed the insult to drag him down, the moment would be twisted, reframed, weaponized. Levitt's smirk would become the headline, her cruelty recast as dominance. But if Patel held his ground, if he responded with dignity that could not be broken, then something extraordinary might happen. He would not just defend himself. He would become the voice of resilience. The embodiment of every American who has ever been told they were less. Commentators watching in real time understood the gravity. Social feeds were already buzzing with disbelief. Some were outraged, typing furiously about the audacity of the insult. Others waited, breathless, for the reply. The narrative was dangling on a cliff, waiting for Patel to seize control. The balance of power had shifted, not through shouting or grandstanding, but through the silence that now demanded an answer. This was not a debate anymore. It was not even about politics in the narrow sense. It was about identity, belonging, and the very definition of America itself. Could a man of immigrant roots look straight into the face of exclusion and declare with calm authority that he was as American as anyone? Could he turn a moment of hate into a lesson of pride? Asterisk, everyone knew the next words would matter. They would not only define Patel, they would define the insult, transform its meaning, and either validate or shatter the millions who had been wounded by similar words. This was a trial by fire, but it was not his trial alone. Asterisk, and so. As cameras zoomed in and the room bristled with anticipation, the stakes crystallized. Patel's answer would not just be about him. It would speak to every immigrant, every child of immigrants, every American who had ever felt the sting of being told they did not belong. Asterisk, and so. With the nation watching, the battle lines were drawn. Asterisk, asterisk, Caroline Leavitt had built her career on outrage. Every soundbite, every interview, every viral clip was sharpened like a blade designed to slice through decency and leave only noise behind. She was young, ambitious, and styled herself as a rising star of the new hard right. But beneath the polished slogans and social media bravado was a pattern and addiction to cruelty dressed up as candor. For Leavitt, politics was never about building. It's only about tearing down. Asterisk, her supporters cheered when she mocked opponents. They laughed when she leaned into stereotypes, when she wore her disdain like a badge of honor. She claimed to fight for authentic America, but her definition of authenticity was narrow, brittle, and exclusionary. It was a vision of America where belonging was reserved for a few, and everyone else was to be reminded of their place. Asterisk, in interviews, she projected certainty. She spoke over hosts, dodged nuance, and leaned heavily on the applause lines that had carried her this far. But the contradictions were glaring. She would invoke freedom, yet cheer for restrictions. She would preach about the Constitution, yet trample its very promise of equality. She would talk of patriotism, yet reduce citizenship to bloodline. To her followers, these hypocrisies were invisible or worse. They were features, not flaws. For the rest of the country, they painted the portrait of a figure addicted to the theater of arrogance. Asterisk, the insult to Patel was not an accident, not a slip of the tongue. It was the culmination of a strategy weaponized division, cloak it in bravado, and pretend it was courage. To her, it was another notch on the belt of controversy. Another clip destined to circulate on sympathetic networks, feeding the endless cycle of grievance politics. She believed that belittling an opponent with a racist jibe would elevate her, that pushing someone like Patel into silence or rage would reaffirm her dominance. Asterisk, but the smugness carried a cost. The more she leaned on cruelty, the more she revealed her insecurity. Where Patel's life was defined by service, sacrifice, and earned respect, Leavitt's was marked by shortcuts, by chasing clout, by mistaking provocation for leadership. She did not build bridges. She burned them for attention, and each burn left behind not strength, but the hollow echo of someone who confused spotlight with substance. Asterisk, for many in the chamber, the irritation was palpable. The insult was not clever, it was tired. It was not bold, it was cowardly. It revealed the bankruptcy of a politics that mistakes heritage for worth and equates exclusion with power. Watching her smirk after those words, viewers felt not admiration but disgust. It was the kind of arrogance that corrodes institutions, the kind of entitlement that rots the promise of democracy. Asterisk, and yet Leavitt was convinced of her invincibility. She had risen quickly, shielded by an ecosystem that rewarded outrage more than integrity. She had learned to weaponize the viral moment, to turn gasps into headlines, to thrive on being called outrageous. To her, being despised by some was proof she was adored by others. She mistook attention for validation, mistook noise for strength. Asterisk, but there is a difference between temporary noise and timeless truth. There is a difference between a headline that fades and a moment that endures. And in that chamber, as she reveled in her taunt, she could not see the trap she had set for herself. By attacking Patel's identity, she had opened a door not just for him, but for millions who had lived through the same indignities. She thought she was reducing him to a stereotype. In reality, she had elevated him to a symbol. Asterisk, her smugness filled the room, but it was brittle. It could not withstand dignity. It could not withstand patience. It could not withstand truth. And she had no idea that in her quest to dominate the stage, she had positioned herself not as the victor, but as the foil. Asterisk, because across from her sat not just a man. Across from her sat a life shaped by struggle, sacrifice, and service. Across from her sat a figure who knew what it meant to endure taunts and rise above them. Across from her sat someone who understood that the most devastating counterpunch is not delivered in anger, but in calm, unwavering truth. Asterisk, but they underestimated who was sitting across from them. Asterisk, Kash Patel's story does not begin in the chamber where Caro more than faith in,